Okay, so this is like the first of my little video thingamajiggies, and we've got Masha du Toit here today, who's a good friend and fellow author in Scolion, and we have decided to talk your ear off for about half an hour or so about our writing and what makes our writing so magical. So, those of you who don't know Masha, do you want to just take it away and tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, so as Noreen has mentioned, I'm a writer of fantasy and science fiction. I'm also here in Cape Town. Yeah, and I'm part of Scolion, which is also Noreen and I and a whole bunch of other writers. It's like a writers cooperative. We help one another.
Yeah. Basically, for that, we got to the point with our writing where we felt that we're not getting served by the traditionals, and also just going indie and on our own is just too lonesome. So we sort of like pooled all our resources and do a trade exchange, and it's been working now for about 4 or 5 years already.
That's right. Yeah.
It's been the best because Masha always helps me out with my formatting, my ebook formatting.
Yeah.
And then, like, I often find we play tag team on some of our clients. Like, she'll do the ebook formatting and I'll do the print layout. So it's working out quite fine.
Yeah.
So anyway, Masha, you've brought out two books in the last 200-300 years.
Yeah. That's right. That's what it feels like.
So
Yeah.
you came out with We Broke the Moon first,
That's right.
which was a sort of
Yes.
like a generational spaceship voyaging in the outer hinterlands of the galaxies. And then the other one, which was a completely different contrast, was Ray and the Cat Thing. So,
Correct.
which is sort of more, I would say, a ghost story kind of.
Yeah, that's probably the closest. It doesn't really fit in anywhere.
No, it doesn't really fit into
Yeah,
anywhere. So,
yeah,
but basically, from a blog post that you did on Scolion, you were talking about how your fiction provided you with hope and with equal measures of despair. I don't know if you want to just chat about that briefly.
yeah. So, we've all been going through this amazing and terrible time. It's odd because it's happening to everyone, but we've also, obviously have quite different experiences based on who we are and how much money we've got and all that kind of stuff, where we live. But I became very aware of how I, as a writer, as a person to whom stories are so important, and I spend such a lot of time in my head. The lockdown experience was a very particular thing where I found that, especially in the beginning, I hadn't actually realized it, but I was already developing some mental health issues around anxiety. I hadn't really, it's weird, it kind of creeps up on you and you think that's just how you are. And then suddenly it's like that story about the frog in the boiling water.
Mm.
Um, but part of how it manifested for me is that I actually realized that I'm actually extremely good at imagining things so that they're real to me, which is probably a good skill for a writer to have. But when you're trying to deal with scary things, suddenly I thought that the right thing to do was to imagine all the worst things that could possibly happen, sort of to prepare myself. But of course, I'm not that tough, and I completely just destroyed myself in a way. But then what's been so interesting is through the process of therapy and just speaking to my friends and meditating, I realized that that exact same skill of imagination and stories is actually also a powerful tool for healing and for escape and relief and finding a positive spin on things. So yeah, it's been a journey for me, you know, as a writer and storyteller. And in particular, those two books that you mentioned, We Broke the Moon and Ran the Cat Thing, they kind of fit quite neatly into those two categories where I actually planned the story of We Broke the Moon mostly before the pandemic happened, but I had to write most of it during the hard lockdown. And it was tough because it's a story about people trapped in a spaceship in isolation. At a time when I didn't want to deal with with those feelings. So that was an experience for me, and that led to me writing Ran the Cat Thing, which was the kind of story I was craving at the time, which is just nothing to do with anything that I had to deal with, and all about human connection and being with friends and eating good food, and so complete escapism.
Did
Yeah.
you also find that you sort of were indulging in travel porn
Oh,
during
yeah. Yeah, yeah. Very much so.
wild fantasies of all the places that you'd love to visit? I mean,
Yes,
I know you were
absolutely.
planning a trip to Turkey,
That's right.
and
Yes. Yeah.
for me, I was planning a trip to the United States. We had all our money saved. We were going to rob our piggy bank.
Exactly.
We're going to have an awesome
Yeah.
2 weeks in New York City, and then we're going to go down to Texas to see friends, and all of that went out window. And there I'm sitting, and I'm like thinking, now my life is just bound by the 600
Yeah.
square meter property that I live on, which mercifully at least has a beautiful view. But there's all those other uncertainties of like, my husband was supposed to go onto a new production and he missed the boat. There were some people already on
Uh,
production that they were paying a furlough basically just to keep them on board, and he just missed it by 2 weeks. If he'd gone two
oh.
weeks, he would have at least had some small salary.
Oh,
And
yeah.
also, I mean, we were lucky that we were still billing our client for work that had been done before the pandemic. But as the pandemic got along, the work sort of trickled to, so you kind of like,
Yeah.
not starving, but you're watching the
Yeah.
oxygen run out, so to speak.
Yes.
You know what
Yeah.
I mean?
And it's easy to forget, even now when it's still relatively recent, what it was like at the beginning of the pandemic, because now we've kind of gotten used to it. It's like you
Mm.
kind of know, what you're not going to die instantly, and we know a lot more about COVID and what's happening. At that time, it really felt like anything might happen, you know.
Um, and one of the friends of mine often said to me, because I mean, I understand the anxiety that you had, and I also suffered a lot of anxiety. My anxiety actually became a crippling anxiety.
Yeah.
I couldn't write, I couldn't work, I couldn't
Yeah.
I couldn't focus on work, to the point where my colleague said to me, Noreen, if you're not going to pull yourself together, we're going to need to get someone else to do the work. And I was like, oh,
Oh, yeah.
yeah. So, it
That
really,
helps. That helps.
I thought to
Yeah.
myself, you know what? The buck stops with me. And my other friend said to me, Noreen, fear is the mind killer. I don't know where that
Yeah.
term comes from, but it's so true. And you allow yourself, you get so attached to these external thoughts of things that haven't
Correct.
happened that you paralyze yourself. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of those last 2 years have been a case of sort of clawing myself back up into a thing. Well, the world hasn't ended, and yes, a lot of people have died, a lot of people have almost died. Our economy is in bad shape. There's been some all sorts of fun things happening, but you know what? We're still here, and we still have
Yeah.
jobs. We still have food. We haven't lost our homes. We still have all these other blessings, and we've learned to live with this. I hate the term the new normal. I freaking hate it,
Mm.
but we've sort
Yeah.
of adapted to the fact that you walk into a shopping center and you put the
Yeah.
stuff on, and you make sure that you've got your mask on. I actually find the mask to be quite liberating. no one can,
Yeah.
no one can see my terrible
Yes.
pimples.
Yeah.
So I know some people complain that they get claustrophobic, but honestly, for me, the mask has been sort of like a way to
Yeah.
hide.
That's the least of it,
Yeah.
honestly. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'm also lucky. I work from home. So
Mm.
I don't have to wear, it's a different thing if you have to wear a mask all day long, all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. No.
So
Yeah.
our lives as freelancers haven't. Okay, I'm getting my Afrikaans on here. Anyway, but our lives as freelancers haven't changed that much, other than the fact that we've had this looming worry about the
Yeah.
kids. And now that
Yeah.
I think we've both gone through journeys to sort of get past it. And where I resonate so much with your writing is your amazing ability to see the natural world and to explore
Ah,
the relationship with the natural world. And I think that is a hallmark of both of our writing.
yeah.
So, and also I really lived for your pictures of you and Brendan when you go cycling down
Oh, yeah.
to the beach, and Brendan's making art all the time, and you're just sitting there, and I see your feet in the sand, and I see the penguins in the distance. It makes me glad. And it really meant a lot to me those times when you came cycling to my house and we could go walk
Oh
around.
yeah,
That was
yeah. That
awesome.
was yeah.
So, getting out in nature is such an important part of healing and
Yes,
connecting with the natural world, especially where we live. We are very lucky. Um,
yes,
a lot of our friends in London and places like that don't, they have to go to a park, and park is always so clean,
yeah,
sterile.
yeah,
And we've got this messy forests and messy beaches. I mean, messy in a good way,
yeah.
messy.
Exactly. Chaotic.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So this
yeah.
brings me on to sort of like we're going to be contrasting. We broke the moon. We broke the moon had a lot of claustrophobia or claustrophobic elements in it, and that whole sense of isolation of people being outside of their usual environment, dealing with that whole fact that beyond your little bubble, there's a very what's the word we're looking for? Deadly environment outside. That it's a constant battle to
Correct.
maintain. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that story?
Yeah, it's I mean it is interesting. You're very right. I always do tend to one of the central parts of my writing is about nature and our relationship as I mean we are animals really, but we're not, and we really do need for for just our existence we need to the natural world. It's easy, we've kind of forget it so easily. It's funny, it's so important to me that I don't actually even make a decision to write about it. It just always is there. Um, and with We Broke the Moon in particular, I wanted to write about actually people who are not in nature. They're so far from nature. They're actually even millions of kilometers away from the earth. And I actually believe that we are not individuals at all, and we cannot survive separately from, I mean, apart from the obvious things that we need, food and water and oxygen and the right kind of bugs in our gut and all of that. We're just part of a natural system. And it was
The
interesting to
organism.
write about, yeah, to write about people who kind of aren't really and have impoverished themselves to such an extent that they're kind of surviving, but and like how do what do they do now? They're trapped there, and how do they survive, and how do they get that sense of, so in my story, one of the ways they stay sane is by going into a virtual world. So because now they're in the spaceship, they can't just step out and go for a walk next to the sea, but they still need to. So they've developed technology which makes it possible for them to experience those sensations of being outside and being in nature. And that was a lot of fun to
Yeah.
explore.
It was quite a combination because you've sort of brought that whole gaming
Yeah,
element into it, which I think will appeal to people. Like, I mean, look, I'm a gamer, so
yeah,
that for me was like, oh my god, I see what you've done here. This is so awesome, and I love how you bring those two different, very different realities together. And I don't want to spoil the story, but
yeah.
it's that story was just amazing. And then it brings us to your palette cleanser, which is Ray and the Catfish.
Yes, that's a good name. That's a good word for it. I need to use that.
So, like, I want to know where the hell is this forest?
Ah, yes. Yeah, it's funny because I kind of reverted back to the very first books I wrote. I was still very uncertain about my ability to create a new environment. So I tended to set my books very much in real places, like actual Cape Town station and so on. And as I got more confident, I started creating my world. So this was a reversion back to, something but it doesn't really exist. It's like nice now, but not nice now. And, so it's also, um, escapist for my writer self. I didn't even have to deal with those
No, well, I
realistic
mean,
planning.
that house really resonated with me. I mean, I grew up in Hout Bay during the 1980s, and I don't know if you ever heard of the sculptor Mitford Barberton.
No.
He did a lot of the Art Deco, Art Nouveau style sculptures that you see
Okay.
on the buildings in town. So if you go to, like, especially in the center of town, you'll see griffins and all sorts of heraldic creatures and gargoyles on the Supreme Court building. He did all of that.
Oh
And
wow.
he lived in Hout Bay, and he built this house. It must have been sort of built late Victorian. So it was huge, and it had like a sunken lounge, and it had sub levels, and it had like mysterious rooms behind rooms, and these tall ceilings, and a music conservatory, and this huge garden that was just completely overgrown. And um, he filled the garden with sculptures. Like if you come in by the gate, there's a leopard with a shield and a baboon with a shield. They sort of
Oh wow, that sounds amazing.
standing there
Wow.
holding guard. And it was actually a very, very big influence for my book, The Guardian's Weird, where Jay goes to visit this little lost prince that's living there. But anyway, that's getting thing. But that house had such a major impact on me because I used to go and play with the great grandchildren, and we used to play hide and seek. And our favorite hiding place was in the attic, where all the old sculptures were under dust cloths. But the thing is, if you ran around in the garden, you would sometimes turn a corner and there would be this verdigris covered sculpture that's just been forgotten.
Ah, wow.
It was just all this mystery, and this house itself, it had some stained glass windows. It was very much, I would say it's heavily influenced by William Morris arts and crafts.
Yes, it
So,
sounds like it. Yeah.
and Victorian elements with this, it had this tower with crenellations at the top with heraldic designs on it, and because we were small we could still climb up inside the,
Ah,
and we'd have to be very careful because the rungs would break. But I just see this house of yours in the middle of the forest, and I just got
yeah,
like absolutely the same kind of vibes, you know. So I could actually see this building that's just so part of nature, and yet falling
yeah.
apart. So
That's
I
right.
just
Yeah,
I love old houses. I love poking around
yeah.
old houses.
Yeah, that was also part of my self-indulgence in writing that story because it was sort of a whole series of private eggs to stories that I've loved. Like that particular house is inspired by a house in a book called Return to Gonaway, which is a children's book about these two kids who discover this abandoned house and then they, clean it up and all this stuff. And it's just that extra, that thing that almost like being an adult, but you don't have any of the responsibilities. And it's this excellent place you can discover. And, so there are lots of things like that. I think probably most of the Easter eggs people won't, it doesn't matter. You're not going to pick up on it. It's just my private little thing I get to indulge. Um,
Yeah, no,
yeah.
it's like with me where I keep writing about New Bethesda. I just
Yes.
I just keep going back there because it's sort of that place has so much resonance that it's like, oh God, there goes Noreen's characters to New Bethesda. Why are they
Yeah.
going to Bethesda? Fucking it's yeah, it's just it's like it's comfort fiction. I mean, comfort
Yeah.
fiction. I mean, sometimes we write something that's completely out of our usual purview just because it makes us happy,
Yeah.
and I think that's also so important. It's not so much getting it's not so much getting to the end of the book for me. It's actually about exploring the world while I'm writing it, and I think that's probably why my writing has slowed down so much over the years. Except I'm not really interested in rushing it, unless of
Yeah.
course I've got a publisher with a deadline, and oh God, don't talk to me about deadlines. They're pushing past right now. But yeah, I should be revising one of my novels, but I'm talking to you instead. So yeah, and then the other thing that I love about, I think with both novels, and I think most of the novels that you've got, is I love the fact that you don't explain everything.
Uh,
Always
yeah.
that sense of mystery. And you've got
Yeah.
these cat things. I don't know what they are. They're not ghosts, they're not fairies, but they're not cats.
Yeah.
And I like the fact that they're not explained. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about those?
Yeah, I mean, it's a trick as a visual artist I use as well, that if you want to create a sense of complexity and richness and reality, actually, we experience the world in lots of little bits. You don't like look at everything and then you see everything and you know everything about it. You just have little snatches. So if as a storyteller, you can replicate that sense of richness and mystery by just sort of picking out little details that suggest other details, and you don't explain too much. But of course, as a storyteller, it can be dangerous to do that if you don't know yourself what's actually behind it, especially when you start working on the sequel, which is I'm doing right now, for Ray and the Cat thing, where that mystery box thing can kind of become old very quickly. So
Yeah.
it's a balancing act where you kind of, yeah. So in the sequel to Ray and the Cat thing, we discover a little bit more about what the cat thing actually is. But on the other hand, it's also something I found interesting is that we don't know what's true about our own world.
Mm.
I mean, there's so few things that you can be sure of. And every time you hear, oh, well, actually, a lot of our emotional experience is actually centered in our gut bacteria, who knew? Uh, so I also feel that as a writer, you don't necessarily have to feel like you know the basic truth about things, because nobody knows the basic truth.
Yeah.
But I mean, you have to take some responsibility for this world you've created. But yeah, it's a balancing act.
Well, it's also just it's also the other trick is also and this is often, I mean, what I'll say, for instance, with Anne Rice, for instance, she retconned with every time she came up with a new book. She kept retconning her vampires until
Yeah.
like I call it the law, the curse of, actually it's the law of too much awesome, or the curse of too much awesome. So now you've had
Yes.
these big explosions and revelations in book one, and now what do
And
you
then
do? Now what?
yeah,
And then
yeah,
now
yeah,
what?
yeah.
And then I think you don't want to end up with vampire mermaids from Atlantis, because that's just,
Yes,
it's too
yes,
much awesome.
yes,
And
yes,
so
yeah,
I understand that very, very fine dance all too well. And I
yeah,
think writing a story where you have a history that even you don't really know the full history of is quite exciting, because you can make these little revelations. And
yeah,
if I think about the writings of Senna, for instance, Tanith Lee and Storm Constantine, they never fully explain all the mysteries. And a lot of the stories sort of just are little vignettes that give you a slice of mood and place. And some people who like their tidy endings and explanations might find those kinds of stories very frustrating, but I love them.
yes,
They sort of huck fuss in my head, and I'm like thinking,
yeah,
what was actually going on there? And then I'll sit there and the story sticks, and if the story sticks, then it's a good thing, I think. Um, and
yeah,
I got that sense with Ray and the Cat thing, that there's a lot of strangeness, and our reality as we view it is quite mutable and
yes, exactly.
unexpected.
Yeah.
So having that mystery, having that sense of mystery, especially these days in the whole TikTok craze and all the madness going on. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, so apart from Ray and the Cat thing too, has the book got a title yet, or?
The title keeps changing. It used to be Ray and the Rising Damp. At the moment, it's Ray and the Stone Cold Xwoman. Uh, but I'm sure that's going to change. I'm doing an experiment at the moment of not doing a lot of planning. I usually do a lot of planning beforehand, and I don't start until I know more or less what's going to happen. And then, of course, the plans go out of the window anyway. So this time I'm just going whatever, jumping in, writing. So yeah, it's all very surprising to me at the moment, and yeah.
And Ray and the Cat thing has now been released, so
Yes.
yeah. And
Yeah.
people, where for South Africans, if they want to get a print copy, where's the
The
best?
print copies don't exist yet. That's my next. It was initially because of the pandemic and just the difficulty of dealing with all that
Mm,
stuff. At the moment, I don't have an excuse anymore, so I just have to do that. But yeah, ebook copies are available from Amazon.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's good. So I'll when I put the video up, I'll put the links in there. And then
Thank
just
you. Yes.
in terms of, I always like to sort of end these little discussions of like, just because I know that there are sort of aspiring authors that are watching it, sort of like, what do you think are some of the most important parts of your writing process?
I think it's actually difficult, especially when you're a young writer. You want to, not even when you, I don't know why I said that, when you're any kind of writer, it's tempting to sort of want to grab onto an identity. Like, I'm the kind of writer who doesn't plan, I just wing it, or only write nonfiction, or whatever. I would say give yourself the chance, especially in the beginning, to be open minded, because you're actually still discovering yourself.
Mm.
And also you change, things change. So don't get too judgmental about your own process. Just kind of be brave and open minded and try a new thing. You know what? Maybe it doesn't work. Then you know that about yourself, and then you don't ever do that again. And
Yeah,
move on. That's what I would say. Yeah.
cool. And obviously not rushing, because I think
Yes.
one of the
Absolutely.
horror stories I see these days, like I see a woman who claims to have written an 80,000 word novel in 3 days,
Oh no. Okay.
and then she's
Well.
edited edit it in 4 hours and uploads it to Amazon the next
Yeah,
day,
no.
cover slapped on.
Mm,
And I often
yeah.
feel that that is sort of killing the very spirit of writing. And I know
Yeah.
what
It definitely takes time.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I mean,
Yeah.
you go
Yeah.
back to a story, you leave a story, you come back to it, and every time you do that, you sort of see something new. You might see an angle that you might not have noticed
Yeah.
before, and it just makes for a richer, more complex sort of setting. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah.
I think we're at the end of our half an hour
Yeah.
more or less. So thank you very, very much, Masha, and
Yeah. A
we'll
pleasure.
we'll definitely do something like this again and soon. I just need to figure out how to stop recording. Cool. Thank you so much.